Hello and welcome to or welcome back to Sharp Scratch. This is a podcast brought to you by the BMJ, where medical students, resident doctors and expert guests come together to discuss the things that we think you need to know to be a good doctor, but you might not get taught at medical school. I'm your host, Zaynah Khan, a medical student in London, and this year I'm the editorial scholar running all things BMJ student. Today is an exciting episode because it's actually the 150th of Sharp Scratch, which is really cool. And I'm honoured to announce who we have with us today. So starting off, we have Laura, who actually was the first host of this podcast. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Laura. I was editorial scholar in 2018 to 2019, and now I'm about to be a medical registrar in Adam Brooks Hospital. Probably will be by the time this episode comes out.
Exciting. And for our expert guests, we also have some previous student editors, which is really cool. I'll start with Tiago. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, my name is Tiago Villanueva. I'm 45. I'm a GP. I'm based in Lisbon, in Portugal. So it all started for me in 2002 when I was recruited as what's called a student advisor, which is, I don't think, a role that exists anymore. And then I moved on to be a collect scholar in 2004. And I was student editor. That was the name. That was the designation at the time. Student editor of Student BMJ back in 2005. I was the first non-UK editor. And in 2013, I came back to the UK as editorial registrar, and I have remained ever since working for the BMJ research team, and I now do freelance work.
Sounds like you like being at the BMJ. And Neil, what about you?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Neil Chanchlani. I'm a UK-based paediatric doctor in training with an interest in gastroenterology. I'm currently working across the Severn and West Midland Deanery. I practice 3 days a week clinically, and the other 2 days a week I'm a clinical editor for the education section of the BMJ. I was a CLEG scholar for the BMJ in 2009, and then student editor from 2011 to 2012. I then went off to kind of build up my CV to come back to the BMJ, and I worked for another journal for 6 years before returning back to the BMJ.
Well, thank you all so much for joining today. I'm excited to have these conversations with you and also try and take all your wisdom by osmosis. But yeah, excited for today. I thought this could be an interesting episode because we all have this insight through our experiences of being the BMJ student editor at various points into the experiences of medical students at the time, whether that's here in the UK or in Portugal or anywhere else in the world, through the pitches that we get sent in and other projects that we may be involved in. So for example, when I get the pitches, I go through them with my manager every Monday morning, and there are kind of themes or patterns that I've noticed. A lot of the pitches I get are about insecurity or there isn't confidence that they're going to have the job that they thought they'd have when they came into medical school. There's these ideas of competition ratios or how strikes are affecting learning. That seems to be something that comes up a lot. And also, I guess with AI, we've been talking about the internet, but I guess now it's more how AI is developing at such a rapid rate, and there's a lot of concern from medical students about how that will affect their learning. So I guess these are some things that are affecting medical students right now, but I thought we could go around the room and talk about what kind of things were affecting medical students during your time. Tiago, can I start with you?
Yes.
20 years ago, what were the things that medical students seem to be affected by?
There was a lot of interest in electives, so doing placement in a different country. All about resources on passing exams. So the student BMJ was very good at that. Giving you case reports with question answer, things like that. Career options. The European Working Time Directive. It was it's a reminder of that the UK was in the European Union back then. And actually, the UK was the most was the country that ironically took the European Working Time Directive more seriously than all other countries. But the focus was mostly on learning clinical medicine, critical appraisal in a non-textbooky way. So that was the purpose of this student BMJ back then. You learn clinical medicine and critical appraisal skills in a non-textbooky way. So it was all fairly standard. There was no AI, nothing. So the internet was just in the beginning. There was this book I don't know if he's still around, but there was a book which was almost a Bible for me. I think he wrote a lot in the BMJ about electives. A guy called Mark Wilson. He had this book called Guide to Electives and Work in Medicine Around the World. So he was this guy, had traveled all around the world, had done I work as a doctor all around the world, from mountain medicine in the Himalayas to working a rural doctor in Australia. So he was like my hero back then. But it was all in a book, because you had no other way to learn about things other than books.
Did you get pictures from students? Did medical students write in physically on email?
Yeah, but you have to note that email was at the beginning back then. Yes, you did, and we were just starting to use this article management system. It was called, I think, BenchPress back then. It looks, compared to Scholar One these days, it looked very rudimentary. It was very 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 basic software. Yeah. So, but we had to do the monthly print issue, so it was mostly receiving the submissions, editing them, and then make sure they fit the pages. So because the emphasis was all on the print issue, so you had to work very closely with the tech heads and the print issue people in the office. Yeah. There was some journalistic content about, like, some person went to do an elective in Kenya, and then someone writing about a career option in as a medical journalist or in the pharmaceutical industry or something, or tips on how to do the MRC GP or passing, things like that.
That's interesting, though, because it's like I'm seeing quite a shift, because most of the pictures and stuff that I get sent in are more like opinion based, or about like events that are occurring around the world, so more like political, I guess, or things about like change to the curriculum, where it sounds like back then, 20 years ago, a lot more of it was based off like the content, like how to pass exams, how to be a good doctor.
Yes.
With these resources.
Yes, because there was no, the word globalization 20 years ago was a concept that was just beginning. There was a talk, we're going to have this the global world. It seemed something so far away. So your your life as a medical student was, I would say, very parochial.
Quite a smaller bubble.
Yes,
maybe. Neil, what about you? What do you think? Like, I don't know how it was for you. Were you receiving pictures, or back in like 2012? What do you think medical students cared about? What were they affected by?
Yes, I was listening very eagerly to your experience, Zaynah's now, and Tiago's 20, 25 years ago. And I feel like my experience sat right in the middle of that continuum. And I feel like medical students evolve very much from Tiago's years to your years. And I was kind of a checkpoint just there. So I think medical students still had a lot of very similar concerns to Tiago's experience. For example, the concept of, how do I get into specialty training? How do I make the most use of my time when I'm at clinical placements? How do I make use of my time now to optimize my choices in the future? I think those are forever questions of medical students. It's a very existential question, but it's certainly one that I saw a lot about. And we would have different sections of the journal that would speak to that area. So we'd have career sections, or we'd have life sections in the journal that would really try to capture some of those elements. And I was thinking about what books I was, what was always checked out of the library when I was a medical student. One that was called So You Want to Be a Neurosurgeon. And that is all about different points or different career profiles of different specialties in the UK and abroad. And I think that's just very classic, right? So you're in this quite intense position. What are you going to do next, right? As medical students, a lot of them are kind of planners. They want to move on to the next thing they achieve, and then what's in the future. But it was interesting also the life element of it. There was a lot of clinical content when I was there as a student, BMJ submitted by students, but there was a lot of life and opinion and editorials as well. And despite about 80% of the submissions of the student BMJ at that time probably being UK based, 10 to 20% being internationally based. Those ratios very well might have changed in future years. I think there was a lot of questions and a lot of interest and discussion about, well, how do I balance this with my personal interests? What are the opportunities to integrate medicine outside of a clinical career? So how can I use medicine on the weekend? And I remember I was very proud of a front cover I was able to publish, which was a pitch following a student on mud, music, and medicine, healthcare for festival goers. So it's that perfect blend of I'm a bit curious, I'm a bit interested in medicine, but I want to make this work for me. I want to go to a festival as well. I want to do a bit of a shift, but not too much. I don't want to lose myself within this. There was a lot of interest in how do I balance this with my part-time job or my extracurriculars? And even if those extracurriculars weren't medical or clinical in nature. So I think medical students, from what I know and from what I teach, probably still have lots of elements of that. But I wonder if it shifted the other way, it's now the potentially a priority of how do I make medicine fit into my wider life rather than how do I make my personal life fit into my career? And I'd be really interested in kind of Laura's and yours views on that.
I think if there is an element of that at all, then it's in a big way due to the having to pay more for university increases this transactional element, increases this element of, not that if you are training, if you're at university for free, medical school for free, you have a sense of perhaps vocation, having a privilege to learn something and having lots of resources at your fingertips. Whereas if you're paying $9,000 or more, then you might have more of a sense of, what am I getting out of it? Is it really worth it? And having this constant, having to sort of really assess the sacrifices you're making against what you're getting out of it, which can maybe tip the scales in the way that you were describing, Neil, which is interesting to think about. I think one thing that neither of you mentioned, but when I was a medical school editorial scholar, a lot of the pitches I received were about mental health. So a lot of perhaps opinion pieces or life pieces or experiences of people managing imposter syndrome, managing mental illness whilst at university, or experiencing major life events and sort of dealing with clinical placement whilst experiencing grief or loss, and how to manage those. Maybe sometimes a sense that they weren't talked about enough, but obviously, that time, 2018, 2019, is during this kind of process of increasing awareness of mental health at university, increasing services and charity services whilst, across all subjects and degrees as well. And I think that spotlighting of mental health has been positive in terms of helping, letting people know, sort of, acknowledging that it's normal for medical school and clinical school to be stressful, and for those pressures, when are those pressures sort of, when are you managing it with resilience and when are you actually simply not coping and you need more support and help, and having more ways to access that, more freedom to talk about it and more ways to access it. I think that was a really important shift that it happened perhaps before I started, but it was well underway, and that was reflected in the kind of pitches I was receiving.
I think it's even sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, I it's interesting because I think that those issues were kind of a bit stigmatizing back in my days. So we didn't have a content on that.
I was going to talk about in terms of the stigma. I think that it is decreasing because even in the pictures that I get, when the conversations we have around mental health and mental illness, there seems to be more systems in place from what students are writing, which is a good thing, because I guess I was thinking, like, back in the days, would people have felt comfortable having their name published alongside this thing that's saying I'm struggling in XYZ way, right? I feel like hopefully there is more opportunity to talk about these things now. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I was at the tail end of that generation which worked very long hours in medicine. That's why I mentioned that there was a huge focus on the European Working Time Directive, because it was a time when doctors worked 80, 100 hours a week. So there was this big push towards reducing working hours of doctors.
That's interesting, because I think people continue to be interested in improving quality of working life and safety, for doctors at work and things like that. That hasn't changed. It's interesting. You were talking about the European Working Time Directive back then, and now we're talking, in 2016 there were the strikes that resulted in the new junior doctor contract with different changes to rota making and the hours we could work. And still now medical students are concerned with how do we work towards safer hours for doctors and better working conditions so that we can do our jobs better.
Yeah. It sounds like it's almost like a universal thing where it's like the work is worth doing and we all want to reach that end and, do this career, but it's sort of like making it feasible to actually get to that point. It seems to be like it's been an issue or something that medical students have been thinking about throughout all of the different time periods we're talking about here. So, Laura, I wanted to ask you, between when you were at medical school and now, like, almost becoming a registrar, have you noticed any changes? Like, what has been different from being a student to a doctor? What changes have happened?
Those years are nearly exactly the years that you're at medical school, right? What year did you start?
2020.
And I finished in 2021.
Okay, yeah.
So my time as a doctor almost perfectly overlaps with your time as a student, I think. And something I've really noticed in that period of time is when I started my F1 job, my foundation years were in a hospital with completely paper charting. Everything was on paper, except images, blood test requests. And that was, honestly, it was a nightmare. 12 different apps on the computer. You had to open every single one. They all took 5 minutes each and they didn't talk to each other. It was a disaster. Anyway, paper charting. So prescribing, note-taking, different forms and stuff, VT assessments, things like that you have to fill in. After foundation program, I went to a different hospital, Addenbrooke's where I currently am, where everything was electronic. And just as I left that previous hospital, they switched to a more, to electronic note-taking and things like that. So I think if I went back to there now, there'd be a lot more electronic documentation, things like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a paper thing like that. The only time I've ever seen paper prescribing is when we're practicing for OSCEs. And I guess like in an ECG when you're printing the thing. Other than that, everything has been electronic in my time.
Absolutely. And it makes a big difference, I think, to medical students learning. Because when I was a med student, if I wanted to assess a patient, I could just see them and then write it down. And even if I hadn't encountered a doctor, my assessment or history or whatever I'd done might be, in the paper notes, whatever, I could participate in that sort of continuity of care very easily, physically. Similarly with prescribing, as I reached sort of my final apprenticeship stage, I could practice prescribing and I would sit there with my junior doctor mentor, my resident doctor mentor, and I would write out the prescription. The resident doctor would look at it and then sign it. And that's not something that really translates to e-prescribing very well at all. But it gave me lots of opportunities to participate in the life of a resident doctor, especially towards the end of clinical school. Whereas I see now with medical students, if you're only in a hospital for a couple of days, having your login up and running, the amount of time you have to spend on the phone to IT if things aren't working, compared to how much you can get out of that login in a couple of days, is a really tough balance to strike. And it can really shut you out of some of the sort of aspects of independent learning on the ward, looking through notes and understanding what's going on, seeing a patient, examining them, looking through the notes to see if your exam matched what previous people had said. That aspect, you can very easily be shut out of that as a medical student. So that's one thing that's really changed a lot. And then, of course, we had COVID. I don't know if we've talked about that on Sharp Scratch before, and I'm sure we will again, about the impact that had on clinical school at the end of mine, at the beginning of yours. And then, of course, over the last couple of years, we've had strikes, and I think that started during my first year in foundation school. Zaynah, have you found that strikes affected your medical school a lot?
So when did strikes? I think the strike started in my first clinical year. So it was interesting though, because we were already only in hospital placement once a week, but then to have it cancelled, which obviously valid and I understand the situation, but like it was always so last minute. Like it's like we've trekked all the way to placement. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're not going to have this simulation teaching or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, I'm here now. Well, now what? So you just go to the library, but you've like come all the way.
That's heartbreaking.
So it was kind of frustrating in that sense. But yeah, I guess strikes have been something that we speak about constantly because it seems to be like on our minds, thinking about what our working conditions will be like in the future, but also whether they'd happen again. Which I guess it's interesting now thinking about whether the ones we had in December, if they were the last ones that would happen.
Absolutely, with the ballot going on right now, yeah.
But it seemed interesting as well because even in the December one, it seemed like from the first set to the last, there was like a protocol, I guess, made because by the end it's like, oh yeah, we know what strikes are like. This is what happened. This is what we're going to do. But like in the first one, it was like pandemonium. Like nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew where to go, what they're supposed to do. And you kind of just sat there like, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of hospitals and other healthcare systems have seemed to, they've got their strategies now. They've got their sort of plans of action. And it is really interesting to see how politically activated doctors have become. I think about, so 2016, that was whilst I was at medical school and the resident doctors' strikes were happening back then, protesting particularly about working conditions. And I was not aware of them. As in, I don't remember so I was preclinical, so that made a difference. I didn't interact with doctors much. Sort of, I was on a traditional course with a big split. So, but I do not remember being particularly activated or aware or concerned about the strikes happening at the time. And it was only when I was a doctor sort of during foundation program striking again that I understood what had really happened during those strikes. I sort of started to get more appreciation of how hard work it was to activate doctors to be willing to strike, the kind of negotiations that happened thereafter, and then of course the junior doctor contract, TCS, I can't remember, terms and condition of service, that came out of that made a huge impact on my working conditions as a foundation doctor. And I think, wow, I know lots of people were dissatisfied at the time with what happened, but as someone who came into sort of normalized exception reporting, self-reporting at overtime, and the sort of the kind of rotas that, maximum 4 nights in a row, things like that. Wow, those definitely made a massive impact on my quality of life, 100%. And so it's interesting, those strikes did not go on as long as these current strikes. And it's really interesting to sort of look back and observe how differently politically activated the doctor body in the UK as a whole is. Neil and Tiago, did you see doctors striking or protesting in your times?
No, because, well, it's interesting because doctors had a better life back then. I mean, there was less social unrest. Okay. Doctors worked very long hours, but their pay was better back then. Their working conditions were better back then. The healthcare system was working better back then. And there was also, then medicine was a guaranteed job. So you would leave medical school and you had a guaranteed position to continue. You're going to have a position for specialist training. Now the ratio between medical students and training positions is large. So it means not all medical students will be able to get a training position. So there's much more uncertainty. So I was able to have tranquility throughout medical school because I knew I would have a guaranteed job. Now that's not the case anymore. That's not the case anymore. But at the same time, people have more options now because medical students now, at least here, they are now learning languages from the outset in medical school because they're considering to move to another country so they start learning German or French because they know that they will not get a training position and they have to think about going elsewhere because all around Europe, all around the world, there's shortage of doctors because medicine is becoming an increasingly less popular option.
I think that's interesting though, like Tiago, you saying that you had that tranquility, so you could be calm because you had that confidence. I think that's probably the main difference. Like I feel like now maybe medical students are becoming a lot more like politically aware or keeping up to date with all these strikes and stuff because there is none of that confidence.
Doctors had a better status back then. The status of our profession has eroded significantly. Also, the public, the general public, is much more vocal now with social media. Back then, there was no social media, so doctors were much more protected. There was not this name and shaming that there is nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. It's like almost like there's cancel culture online with celebrities, but there's like a constant fear that you are being surveyed, so that cancel culture could trickle into your professional life as well. Neil, what about you? How were you affected by strikes, or did that happen during your time? Or
It's interesting thinking back. So I remember publishing articles in 2011 about strikes, but actually not about strikes in the UK. I remember European-based strikes, or I remember kind of more international-based strikes for for doctors rather than medical students. I was a junior doctor for the first lot of the 2016 strikes. I was just began specialty training, and it's interesting thinking about strikes and how they've come over time, because like Laura, I think they're a proxy for discontent, right? So the currency is money or striking, but the ethos and what it represents is so much more than that. It's change in systems, it's change in policy, it's change in the world, right? You know, people are stressed. They didn't have as high volumes as us. When you really kind of get into the strikes now about with senior doctors, they say it was a very different time back then, you know, and a lot of them didn't really have the right to strike in the same way that we do. I mean, a lot of countries don't allow doctors to strike, full stop.
Yeah.
So it's interesting what this movement represents now and what factors have led into it, which is, of course, not just at a institution or professional level, but you know, at a global level, you know, how we're caring for patients differently, how workload pressures have changed, how where we sit with resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't remember, certainly as a medical student, I don't know if it would have been my radar for the reasons that Laura said anyways, but you're hearing the voice, and if you're reading kind of not only student BMJ, but, you know, broadsheets or the BMJ's letters, you're hearing voices from medical students. We're here, we're keeping an eye, you know, we want change to happen. We want a better life for ourselves, for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, here's how we're going to voice our concerns to get there. So I think the ability to do that is amazing. And I think that kind of comes into some of the confidence elements I've said about students now compared to where I felt they were, or even I was, you know, 15, 20 years ago. And I think, you know, watch the space because they're the next generation, and they're the ones that policies now need to serve.
It's interesting, Neil, what you said about this discontent, because I remember earlier you said that one of your experiences of clinical school was being in a firm.
Yes.
And you were you were a student editor in 2012, and then I was there at sort of 2018, 2019. And by the time I was there, firms didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Just in that very short period of time. And for me, I think that's a huge experience, a huge factor in discontent amongst resident doctors and also medical students, in terms of the loss of this feeling that you belong to something, belong to a team, that you, especially, and then the way that trickles down to medical students even more. That it's very difficult to integrate into a team, to have continuity, professional relationships, and things like that. So it's interesting. Even in just that short time, we had that big change.
Absolutely, in the way you were fostered, in the way that you kind of had responsibility, chain of events. And I think we've lost that even in hospitals to a certain degree.
Definitely.
With the introduction of European Working Time Directives, better and safer practices for shift work, without necessarily more resource. You see over time is a loss of continuity, and who's holding on to that? Well, it goes to the person above, because and that's a very challenging concept to rectify across the world.
I guess, Neil, I want to ask you, this is something that you spoke about earlier, but outside of being a doctor, what other opportunities has medicine offered for you?
I think my time as a medical student, I look back and it's a very, very unique time for lots of reasons, and some of which we've discussed before. But I think, as I mentioned briefly before, with medical school, you get this hall pass that you're a medical student and you get this badge of honor, and you know, go off and learn and come back in 5-6 years and you'll be a doctor type thing. And I think that badge is really, really special. And I wish I knew more about how to use that badge effectively at that time, because you're not constrained by necessarily, or most of us aren't constrained by kids at that time, or necessarily a relationship which makes you geographically bound, or different financial contracts, or different kind of home issues. So just use it. Just use that badge really, really efficiently. You know, go places, use your electives, spend your holidays if you can, gaining new experiences that may or may not help inform your career choices. But for every experience I had that did help me for my career choice. I had about 10 that didn't. And that was really important for the way I learned. And I was similar as a foundation doctor. I had to try every single specialty once. I tried lab medicine and anesthetics and pediatrics and GP and what, medicine and surgery, over time psychiatry. And that was, again, really important for me to know what to do next. I had to try and fail or try and succeed. And that's what medicine is really, really good at. There's so many adjacent medical jobs, publishing, pharmaceuticals, research. There's lots and lots of alternative medicine career conferences. And I think if you're interested to just go see what's out there, a clinical career is really, really suitable for some and really appropriate for some. And not having a clinical career is really, really important for a lot of other people. And that's absolutely fine. I think your medical degree gives you this beautiful badge of honor that you've been through a hard bit of work and you can achieve when you can focus. And that is a very usable currency for the rest of your life. But what you don't get over time is the time to use that as well as you did as a medical student. That's what I think I try to tell people now, because right now you have the least obligations you probably will ever have it for the rest of your life, and to use that wisely. And so I ended up doing a PhD and medical publishing and lots of research. But I'm also kind of in a personal and family situation where that demands a lot of my time as well. And I think that's really important for me to be good at my job clinically, and even my non-clinical job, to have a lot of that time at home. And there's been lots of choices that I've had to make to get it to that balance. And that's not a lot of, that's not the same challenge or problems that other people face, but it's one that I think that doesn't get talked about as much as when you're a student. That is definitely hugely important as you progress throughout your career.
That's really interesting, Neil, because I often end up giving slightly different advice to medical students who feel overwhelmed by the number of choices, the roads they can't travel down. I often say something quite different, which is that at the moment, with foundation program and training programs as they are, it looks rigid, and it is quite rigid. It's quite difficult to make interdeanery swaps partway through a program, things like this. But what I tell people, and I know lots of examples from colleagues, friends who I've done foundation program with, who are now doing different things, who've taken very non-linear tracks, is that those opportunities do stay in different forms. And there are lots of one-year opportunities to do more education or research or another out-of-program kind of thing. You can chop and change. You can take time out in the middle of a program. You can change your mind about your career. You can make career swaps even quite late in training. People do these things. And if you want to, those opportunities will continue to be there. And I think that can, for different medical students, that can be quite important to hear, because there are so many opportunities during medical school, as well as a lot of content, a lot of things to learn, and so many resources to try and choose from, that there are opportunities that remain. And you make a good point, Neil, that there'll come a time where you can't travel as easily, you can't relocate as easily. And definitely medical school is a special time in many ways. But also, although the road after university can look rigid and fraught, and you might be worried about not having a job, but there are different kinds of things you can do. And if you're not sure what you want to do now, and you think should I do research? Should I switch career? Should I do something different? If you want to start foundation program, there's time to change your mind a bit later and go and explore other, sort of parallel careers later on as well. And those opportunities will keep being there if you want to look for them as well.
Absolutely. I think part of that is a change of the times. There's so much opportunity now as well. There's a lot of fellowships, there's a lot of one-year positions.
Yeah.
I'd say 90% of everyone I've ever worked with since I've qualified in 2013 has been part-time. Okay, yeah. So I've worked in a huge part-time specialty, between 60 and 80% for most pediatricians. And that is for a lot of reasons, but that has changed as well since even 10 years ago, and certainly since 20 years ago, the allowance of that type of freedom to develop yourselves on your off days. And that presents other challenges, but lots of other opportunities. So certainly, if you're a curious medical student, there will be time to explore that. When you want to explore that is up to you, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Tiago, what about you? What opportunities do you think medicine has helped you find?
Well, the first thing was that my medical school was very hospital-centric. It was a big university hospital. My experience, it was a very traditional curriculum, very hospital-centric. And from early on, I felt I didn't feel that I belonged in that world of very hierarchical, rigid hospital medicine, which almost seemed like military style setting, and that's when I discovered community medicine, which led me to become a GP. And also my undergraduate and postgraduate experiences were much better in general practice. So first of all, was finding my field, that there was more to than just hospital medicine. And then, of course, I remained connected to. After the student BMJ experience, that little bug never left me. So I found a way to come back to BMJ roughly almost 10 years later as editorial registrar. And that was, 12, 13 years ago. And I've remained with the BMJ ever since. And I've never left since then, working in the research team. And the experience with the BMJ also led me to become a front-runner candidate to take up the position of editor-in-chief of the Portuguese Medical Journal. They're a very different kind of job. You have to deal with.
It's pretty cool.
You have to deal with things that you didn't have to deal with as a student editor. You have to navigate politics and deal with difficult people.
So much drama.
But also, you were speaking earlier about activism and how medical students now are much more engaged in activism, and I got engaged into medical politics. I was dragged into medical politics because someone needed to be replaced to go to attend a meeting at a European organization of GPs. And someone asked me, "Can you cover for me in this meeting?" And then I never left. And now I'm the president of the organization.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes.
Very serendipitous.
So so basically we doing lobbying and lobbying with the European decision makers, advocacy for GPs, and I'm happy to say that we've never had as much advocacy for GPs as we have now, and that politicians, unfortunately, they don't really know much about medicine outside the hospital. So we really have to teach them basic general practice 101 and primary care and so on.
Such cool things you're up to. And I think it's really reassuring for me, listening to it as someone who's still at medical school, like hearing from you, Tiago, Laura, and from Neil about these opportunities that are available. Because sometimes when there's so many things going on with like job insecurity and things, it can feel a bit disheartening. Like I've gotten myself into a system that is changing while I'm here and is no longer made for me. It feels like you're a bit trapped sometimes. But I don't know, it makes the commitment feel worth it because you know that there are so many wonderful opportunities available and it's not just one way. Like clinical medicine, it sounds like your experiences are really great, but it also sounds like there's so many other avenues that you can venture into. So medicine does open a lot of other doors to explore things that you might be interested in.
Definitely. I think now you have much more opportunities than we had back then. It was so much harder to venture out of the beaten path 20 years ago. And I've always felt like a person who had to venture out of the beaten path, and it was so much harder 20 years ago. But there was less volatility than there is now, less uncertainty. Everything was very linear. And now, because this was before globalization, so there was much more serenity. But at the same time, there was more limited opportunities. So yeah, it's a trade-off.
I've been really encouraged hearing from you, Tiago and Neil, about how hearing some themes that haven't really changed. And that is that medical students remain curious, remain wanting to pass exams, but also, wanting to find opportunities and balance and things like this. And I find it really encouraging because that's something I see at work now, that yes, things are tough and they've changed and they're evolved and we're striking and we're post-COVID and there's discontent. But fundamentally, people remain in this job and choose this job because they want to practice medicine. They want to treat people. They want to help people recover from illness. And a lot of the time we're working in a system that seems to not let you do the best of your job, but nonetheless, people keep persevering, keep trying. And that's a common theme across medical students, across doctors, I think across the last 20 years from our discussion that I'm hearing. People are enjoying and trying to do their best at work, to help patients recover in whatever ways they can, despite the limitations, despite the challenges. At the same time, we're also continuously, over time, from the European Time Directive to striking now, continuously also advocating for ourselves and trying to help increase doctor safety at work so that we can do our jobs better. And that is something that really encourages me at work as well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I notice is that medical students now are much more entrepreneurial than we were back then. That they create their own jobs and their own opportunities. For example, I was hearing yesterday about this doctor here that created her own business in lifestyle medicine. Because medical students now are not afraid to. They don't want to do the linear road that we did 20 years ago. So they create their own opportunities and they open their own businesses. So it's a completely different game. Yeah.
Sounds like we're all taking the road less traveled by, and it's going well. Well, this has been a really reassuring episode for me, I guess, seeing all the different changes and getting all your wisdom and insight into the experiences then, and I guess hope for the future now. I want to thank you all for joining this episode. I've been very grateful to have you. And to the listeners, I hope that you are also able to enjoy this. Make sure you subscribe if you want to listen to another episode. They come out every 2 weeks. And follow us on all our social media, which will be linked below. For now, I've been your host, Zaynah, and I'll catch you next time. Until then, stay sharp. Bye.